Welcome to the Progressive Christian Bible Study. Today we are looking at the parable of the prodigal son in Luke chapter 15. It is the gospel reading for this upcoming Sunday in the season of Lent. I want to begin with the first of the three P's, prayer. And this is a prayer for the fourth Sunday in the season of Lent, and it comes from the UCC resource, Worship Ways. Holy God, holy renewal. After times of broken relationships, painful injustices, and feeling deserted, we enter this season yearning for restoration and your comforting grace. In this time of wilderness and reflection, we evaluate the relationships between us and our neighbors. Fill our weary souls with hope. Lead us on roads of renewal, and focus our minds as we ponder our calling in your realm. Amen. Okay, the second of the three P's is perspective, and we are continuing the sermon series called Diamonds in the Rough. And today, the diamond in the rough is focused on the diamond inside this prodigal son, according to the Gospel of Luke. But what I want to focus on is, in terms of the perspective, is something from social scientific research, which I'll get to in just a moment. So in this week's gospel reading, the prodigal son asks for his inheritance, or his share of the inheritance, before his father's death. It's pretty much a way of saying that his father's value to him was not in his father's life, but in his father's death, because typically inheritance only passes on after a family member dies. Now, I think we get that the son's request is a bit odd, but we don't really get how much of an insult this would have been in the ancient world. So to help us get a sense of just how significant his request is, I want to borrow from social scientific research on two categories. The first is honor-shame, and the second is kinship. Both ideas were very much a part of the cultural world of the ancient Mediterranean, and both sit in the background of today's gospel reading, or this week's gospel reading. And both ideas are also interrelated. So one New Testament scholar has pointed out that, quote, the kinship system in the ancient Mediterranean world, the family system, can be understood only when we realize that family honor is on the line in every public interaction. So, family and honor are interrelated aspects of social life in the ancient Mediterranean world, and both of them, again, are found in the parable of the prodigal son. So let's first zero in on the notion of honor-shame. So one feature of the social life of the ancient Mediterranean world, or the ancient Roman world, is what social scientists call honor-shame. So honor is the public recognition of one's social standing, and it took two forms in the ancient world. The first form was what's called ascribed honor. And this was honor that accrued to you based on your family of origin. So if you were born into a senatorial class family or an equestrian class family, one of the aristocratic families in the Roman world, you would have ascribed honor just by virtue of being born into that family. So that's one form of honor. The other form of honor in the ancient world is what's called acquired honor. And this is based on one's virtuous deeds, or based on one's membership in a group, or it could be based on some other kind of achievement. So athletic achievement, for example, or courage in the military. Other forms of acquired honor. One scholar, his name is Richard Rohrbaugh, he calls honor, quote, the core value of the ancient Mediterranean world. It was the goal, the passion, the hope of all who aspired to excel. And that great philosopher Aristotle once likened or equated honor with happiness. So honor is a big deal in the ancient world. And because honor was such a desired virtue in the cultural world of the ancient Mediterranean, we actually find references to honor throughout the New Testament. Of course, New Testament writers are embedded in this cultural world. So they refer to honor in a variety of different ways. And one of them is in Romans chapter 12, where Paul actually exhorts the Christians in the Roman churches to, quote, outdo one another in showing honor. Now, he says that because he knows, first of all, I'm sure he believes that, but he also knows that it's going to strike a chord with the audience because they too are embedded in this ancient Mediterranean world and in this cultural context. And in the story about the prodigal son, which we'll read in just a moment, we see both that the son has ascribed honor in the sense that he's born into a wealthy family, but also, presumably, that he wanted to acquire honor on his own by taking his share of the inheritance and going and making something of himself so that he could be honored by his peers. He could gain the recognition of his peers. Now, instead of that, according to the story, he lost it all and was shamed, publicly shamed. So shame, according to Richard Rohrbaugh, was, quote, a social catastrophe in the ancient world, especially since shame for one member of a family meant shame for all. So the prodigal son's shame would have shamed everyone else in his family. It's not just his own individual shame that's at stake here. The whole family is on the line. So shame was a loss of face in public, a loss of honor. And again, Aristotle, he likens the fear of dishonor to the fear of death. Now, there were certain careers in antiquity that were viewed as inherently shameful. So careers like being a prostitute or a sailor or a tax collector or even a fisherman to a certain extent, etc., etc. Incidentally, the very people whom Jesus hangs out with in the Gospels. Now, at the end of the prodigal son's story, the prodigal son ends up feeding pigs. So he is descended into shame so far that he's now in close relation with the least kosher animal in Judaism. He has shamed himself as far as someone could. And because of this close connection between kinship and honor-shame, the prodigal son's shame in the story would have shamed everyone else in the family. In effect, the entire family becomes as low as the pigs, which makes the father's reaction to his prodigal son so stunning. He leaps off his porch, he races down the road, bear hugs his son, showers him with kisses, throws him a party. He treats him as an honored son, in spite of the fact that this son has brought so much shame on himself and on his family. The father doesn't care about honor and shame. He only cares about his son. This is the reason why the story is such a beautiful example of grace, which is undeserved or unmerited favor. The father treats the shamed son as an honored, beloved son, showers him with grace. And it's a story that showcases God's grace toward each one of us. Which brings us to the third P, and that's pieces of Scripture. And again, this is Luke chapter 15. So we're going to read the first 3 verses and then skip down to the parable itself, which starts in verse 11. Now all the tax collectors and sinners were coming near to listen to Jesus. And the Pharisees and the scribes were grumbling and saying, "This fellow welcomes sinners and eats with them." Then Jesus said, "There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger of them said to his father, 'Father, give me the share of the property that will belong to me.' So his father divided his property between them. A few days later, the younger son gathered all he had and traveled to a distant country, and there he squandered his property in dissolute living. When he had spent everything, a severe famine took place throughout the country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed the pigs. He would gladly have filled himself with the pods that the pigs were eating, and no one gave him anything. But when he came to himself, he said, How many of my father's hired hands have bread enough and to spare, but here I am dying of hunger? I will get up and go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me like one of your hired hands. So he set off and went to his father. But while he was still far off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion. He ran and put his arms around him and kissed him. Then the son said to the father, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father said to his slaves, Quickly bring out a robe, the best one, and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. And get the fatted calf and kill it. And let us eat and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. And they began to celebrate. Now his elder son was in the field. And when he came and approached the house, he heard music and dancing. He called one of the slaves and asked what was going on. He replied, Your brother has come, and your father has killed the fatted calf, because he has got him back safe and sound. Then he became angry and refused to go in. His father came out and began to plead with him. But he answered his father, Listen, for all these years I have been working like a slave for you, and I have never disobeyed your command. Yet you have never given me even a young goat so that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours came back, who has devoured your property with prostitutes, you killed the fatted calf for him. Then the father said to him, Son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. But we had to celebrate and rejoice, because this brother of yours was dead and has come to life. He was lost and has been found. Okay, so some of what I'm going to deal with today is a bit of a review from the last time that I preached on this story, which was back in October when I was in the midst of the Good Life series, and I was talking there about the good life in grace. And this story is such a beautiful example of grace that I couldn't resist preaching on it during that series. But now it's on the lectionary for the coming Sunday in Lent, so I'm going to be preaching on it again. So a little bit of this is review for some of you who watched that Bible study back in October. So the first thing I want to do is look at the literary context around this story within Luke's gospel. So the prodigal son parable is the third of three parables that Jesus tells in Luke chapter 15. All three of them are told in response to the first two verses of the chapter, where the Pharisees and scribes are mad and they just can't understand why Jesus would be eating with tax collectors and sinners. Why would Jesus associate with people who are so shameful? Why doesn't Jesus want to acquire honor like presumably everybody else? So Jesus tells three parables that respond to these implicit questions of the Pharisees and scribes. The first parable is about a shepherd with a flock of 100 sheep. Which one of you, says Jesus, having 100 sheep and losing one of them, does not leave the 99 in the wilderness and go after the one that is lost until it's found? The second parable tells of a woman who had 10 silver coins but lost one of them. What woman, says Jesus, having 10 silver coins, if she loses one of them, does not light a lamp, sweep the house, and search carefully until she finds it? And then the third parable, today's parable, consider the man who had 2 sons, says Jesus. Even after the younger son took his share of the inheritance and squandered it, would the father disown his son for bringing shame on the family? Jesus tells how the father rushes out to greet and celebrate the arrival of his son. The father honors his son in spite of the shame his son brought on the family. So each one of these stories heightens the value of the thing that's been lost. So first, it's a lost sheep. Then it's a lost coin, and finally it's a lost son. And implicit in these three parables is the point that if you agree that it's worth searching for a lost sheep, or it's worth tearing the house apart to find a lost coin, or it's worth welcoming home a lost son who's been shamed, then you should also agree to welcoming anyone who's lost their way or fallen into shame. how much more valuable is a real-life human being, a tax collector and a sinner, than a sheep or a coin or a hypothetical lost son? So the three stories answer the religious leaders' objection to Jesus eating with sinners. But these three stories are also theological. So each one is meant to speak about God. So God is like a shepherd who leaves the flock to find that one lost sheep. And God is like a woman who ransacks her house to find that one lost coin. And God is like the Father who rushes out to embrace his returning Son. So we can put that slightly differently and say, no one is outside the searching grace of God, whether it's the stodgy religious leader who judges everyone, or the prodigal son who wastes everything life offered him. God will show grace even to the most shamed or shameful person. Which reminds me of a quote by writer Anne Lamott, which I've shared before in sermons. The mystery of grace, she wrote, is that God loves Henry Kissinger and Vladimir Putin and me exactly as much as he or she loves your new grandchild. Go figure. A quote that is especially relevant today given what's going on in Ukraine. So now let's look at a couple of specific things in this story, things that I find are interesting. So first of all, in verse 12, it says, "The younger of them said to his father, 'Father, give me the share of the property that will belong to me.' So his father divided the property between his sons." So the younger son is asking for his share of the inheritance early. The request, in effect, shames his father. The younger son is basically saying, "I wish you were dead. But since you're not yet dead, how about you give me my share of the inheritance now?" The younger son then leaves home to a faraway land and wastes everything. He goes to Vegas and blows it all. Then in verses 15 and 16, there's a little literary detail in here that Luke provides, and it shows us who are reading and interpreting this story just how far this son has fallen. So verses 15 and 16 read, "So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed the pigs. He would gladly have filled himself with the pods that the pigs were eating. No one gave him anything." So consider the context of the story. It's Jewish Jesus, a rabbi, telling this story to Jewish followers. And so the pigs in the story basically function in a way to show how far this person has fallen, because pigs were the quintessential unkosher animal in Judaism. So this dude has fallen so far that he is wallowing with pigs and even longing to eat their food. It is the utmost in shame. But then in verse 17, we're told that he came to himself. Perhaps it's a signal of the divine spark that resides in every single human being, no matter how shamed they are. And it can't be extinguished, no matter how far someone has fallen. You can put that differently and say, no one is beyond hope. So the son has hit rock bottom, and he realizes that he could return home, but he doesn't feel worthy to return home as a son. He knows what he's done. He knows the shame that he's brought on himself, and by extension on his family. And so he reasons out that he could try to return to his father, not as a son, but as one of the hired servants. And he concocts this speech in verses 18 and 19 that he plans to say to his father, "Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me like one of your hired hands." I imagine him as he's making his way home, just repeating this speech over and over, practicing it, rehearsing it as he's getting ready to meet his father face to face. There's one more little detail in the middle of this story, which is in verse 20. It says he set off, which is a smooth translation of Luke's Greek. Luke's Greek literally reads, and rising up he left. That rising up is the same word that's used of resurrection in the Easter story. And I think it's meant to be a pointer to the story's final verse, where the father says to his son, or says that his son was dead and has come back to life. So in a way, the story is also about new beginnings, new life. It's a story about resurrection. So also in verse 20, it says, while he was still far off, his father sees him, rushes out, embraces him, showers him with kisses, and then throws him this welcome home party. And you know, one of the things about gospel stories is that they're very terse, and they include some interesting details, but sometimes you got to read between the lines to kind of imagine scenarios in these stories. And I imagine that this father was just heartbroken that his son had gone away. And I imagine him going out basically on his porch every night and just looking down the road, longing to see his returning son. And finally that day arrives, and he races out to embrace his son. Verse 20 says he was filled with compassion. So that is such a powerfully emotional word. It means that the father felt it in his belly, felt it in his guts. He felt the shame of this son. He felt the pain of this son, but still he embraced him. So shame is just not a concern for the father in this story. It's not a concern. He's going to show his son unconditional love no matter what. He's going to honor him as a son. So the last part of this story focuses on the older son who's obeyed all the rules. He's done what he's supposed to do. I'm the oldest son in my family. I sympathize with the older son in the story. And the older son, he hears the partying that's going on, and he just refuses to go into this celebration. He's bitter that his younger son is being welcomed home in this way. He's irate. Now, what's interesting about the interaction between the older son and the father is that the older son also shames the father. So he first of all refuses to go into the party. But then secondly, when the father comes out and pleads with him, he starts to argue with his dad. So he's bringing shame on his father in this interaction. There's a little detail at the end of the story. It's the change in pronouns that is very interesting. So this is in verses 30 and then in verse 32. But when this son of yours came back, who has devoured your property with prostitutes, etc. So this is the older son speaking to the father. When this son of yours. And then in verse 32, the father says, we had to celebrate and rejoice because this brother of yours was dead and has come back to life. So the father is reminding the older son that this is still your brother. We're not going to treat him as a hired servant. We're going to honor him as a member of this family. It's another example of the father showing grace. He's not just showing grace to the younger son in the story, he's showing grace to the older son as well. And again, he doesn't seem to care about the shame that the older son has just put on him. Shame is just not something that this father cares about. He only cares about his beloved children. So, like the stories about the lost sheep and the lost coin, the story about the lost son is really a story about God. God will be gracious to everyone regardless of how ashamed they are, because God loves all of God's children unconditionally. It doesn't matter who you are or what you've done. You are always in the place of honor in God's eyes.